we go. Was he like, hush down? Everybody get on the magic carpet. Do you remember a day where you might have sat on a magic carpet? It was in my preschool days where everybody would gather around the outer edge of a big magic carpet, right? And a lot of times you would get around that magic carpet for something like show and tell, or the teacher would be teaching us a new letter. Yeah? Uh-oh, I think it's Mr. H today. Remember Mr. H? And she would go, oh, yeah, she's nodding along. But, there's other ways that we get each other's attention. You remember the sermon I gave where I had a whistle like a PE coach? And I told everybody to strip. Yeah, that'll get your attention pretty quick. Sometimes at home, how do I get y'all's attention? I yell at you. That's the answer. Especially when you're downstairs and I'm upstairs. How do I get your attention? I holler for you. Yeah? And then sometimes, unfortunately enough, when you're right in front of me, I might holler at you too. How did Jesus go about getting folks to settle in for what was going to be a sermon of sorts? There's a way you do that when you got a structure, when you got a building. Y'all know the time that we start worship. You know some of the clues. You know the prelude's going to be playing. You know people are going to light candles. And even then, sometimes it's hard for us to settle down and focus in on what the preacher's going to say. Don't you imagine Jesus went in to some of those crowds, but a lot of times the teaching he's doing, the teaching we're going to talk about today, boy, you ever been to a baseball game where there are young players out on the field? You know how distracting a cloud can be? Or a bumblebee? Or a blade of grass? Or the person next to you? Don't you think there were some distractions within these crowds? Well, what Jesus is doing here is he's telling his disciples, these newly called disciples, if you remember last week, come on and follow me. We're going to fish for people. And they've had some alone time. Might call it team building. But they've been removed from the crowds. They've been off by themselves. You got to imagine at least 12, but there's probably more in that core group of disciples. And he's going to tell them that everything you're going to do from this time going forward is going to be the cost. It's going to be what you need to strive for as a disciple. In order to do this, I'm going to need to teach you, and you're going to have to listen. No better than that. You're going to have to be willing to listen this morning. That scholars are telling us here that this Luke passage is a lot like a passage from Matthew. And so maybe it's just a telling of the same sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. But, it's also could be that, this traveling preacher, he was, going at it in similar yet different ways, town to town, crowd to crowd, congregation to congregation. And I've done a bit of that too. We all might say we've done a bit of that if we have some public speaking in our pocket. And, maybe it was the same sermon, maybe it wasn't, and we don't need to really pick a side when it comes to that. That's a challenge in its own self. What's also going to be challenging for us today is because we're going to talk about poverty. And I, like you, would scratch my head and say, I don't know why poverty exists. Yes, we have theories, we have ideas, but I don't know why it exists. And I also don't know what it is to be truly poor as we define what poverty is. I think there are those that could say they really know poverty that we only think we know something about. So this is going to challenge us because we understand that being poor or being impoverished is a way for folks to really express genuine humility. When you don't have very much, you can't get all puffed up about what you don't have. And we also know that those who are beaten down and oppressed are all the more likely and willing to depend on God for everything that they have, everything they could hope for, and everything they received. And so I thought about this. Well, what's the poorest I've ever been? For me, it would be somewhere around 2005. There was a hurricane called Katrina. It swept through New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. And, I was living in that area at the time, living very much month to month, paycheck to paycheck, but I didn't even receive checks. We're talking about tips. We're talking about cash. We're talking about what you could earn for that day and better spend it that day because you might not have tomorrow. I didn't live with a vision too much further down the road. I didn't have the ability to do that. No vehicle, no financial support from family. And then the hurricane comes along and all my secondhand furniture and everything else, my clothes, my books, gone. So I lived on a couch, my mother's couch, for about 6 months. Found a job, started to rebuild as best I could. Moved back to Galesburg in 2006 with nothing. Lucked into a hand-me-down car that somehow made it from Kentucky to Illinois. And then started to rebuild some more. You need forks. You need spoons. I had a girlfriend that told me, Jordan, you need napkins. All these different things that you've gone without. And then I start to think about that, and I'm going to tell that story to somebody who's going to tell me real quick, you still don't know what it is to be poor. You still don't know what it's really like. You might have a little idea of what people in this crowd are going through, but your tax rate isn't 90%. You're not disabled beyond a working capability. You haven't been disowned by your family. You're not relying on the handouts of others. You have more than one pair of shoes, Jordan Knight. On and on, you could set the example of, I don't know what it is to be poor. I think I do. I might have a season or two in my life where I had less than, but do you know what it is? Remember, as we explore today's text, and we will read it eventually, our story, our relationship with Jesus is always going to be this mix of what appears to be blessings and sorrows. Or in the church world, beatitudes and woes. And these experiences define God's relationship with his disciples. Now, this church calls itself the disciples of Christ. Do you see yourself as a disciple? And if you say yes with your eyes, your heart, your mind, your body, this is a challenging text for us who consider ourselves to be disciples. Because we're going to be challenged to believe that blessings or beatitudes are a result of when you lose your possessions. Ever been in a car wreck? That was God blessing you. Ever lost your job and didn't know you were going to get called into the boss's office that day? It's God blessing you. Ever lost somebody you love? God's blessing. Yeah. Loss of life, loss of family, losses because you love Jesus. Ever lost a friend because of your Jesus following? Ever had a family member look at you sideways because of your Christ calling? Ever had somebody call you into question when you do X and they remind you, well, aren't you a Christian? I thought you went to church. All these losses Jesus is going to challenge these disciples should be chalked up as a blessing. And yet, if you answered yes to any of those things that I just put before you, tough to see it as a blessing. Especially in that moment when Paul says, when these things happen, rejoice. And I'll say it again, rejoice. Later in this text, Jesus is going to say, leap for joy when you lose your job. Leap for joy when your loved one passes away. Leap for joy when your house falls down. With that in mind, let's read some of the Bible together. Luke chapter 6, starting in the 17th verse. Here we go. When they came down from the mountain, my smarts tell me they were on a mountain. Yeah. The disciples stood with Jesus on a large level area, surrounded by many of his followers and by the crowds. There were people from all over Judea and from Jerusalem and from as far north as the seacoast of Tyre and Sidon. They had come to hear him and be healed of their healed of their diseases, and those troubled by evil spirits were healed. Everyone tried to touch him because healing power went out from him, and he healed everyone. We're going to see a picture up on the screen. Last several weeks, we've looked at those biblical maps to better set the stage of where we are. And so when the Bible is telling us people from all over, there's all over. Now, what we can better understand about this, if you see in the blue part of your map, you've got Tyre and Sidon. These are in an area of a world where they're big port cities. If you've ever been to New York, if you've ever been to New Orleans, if you've ever been to San Francisco, you can find a lot of culture there. That's why when you go to these places, you can easily find a place that's called Chinatown, right? Or the different ethnicities that are represented in food, in clothing, in music, and it all comes right there, and they call that a melting pot. So you got to imagine a lot of that melting pot is hearing things all the way up there, miles and miles away, not in Aramaic, not in Hebrew, in their language, about some obscure carpenter's son further down south, next to that thing we might call a lake, but they're calling the Sea of Galilee. See, he's hanging out down there in Capernaum where all those Jewish folks live. You've heard about them, they only worship one God. Do you know in this time of the world how strange that makes you? Because the known world worships many gods. And you know what? If you travel to Tyre and Sidon, you know what the thing you do is when you go and you're traveling somewhere, you honor the gods of that city. And so the Jewish folks, well, they won't honor other gods because they believe their God is the only God. So it makes them kind of seem a bit rude. Like they think they're better than everybody else. Well, they kind of got their nose up in the air. They don't. When I go to their synagogue, I put something in the plate, but they don't do anything like that when we go. We can go on from there. Different skin colors, different belief systems, different social economic backgrounds, different part of the world. Traveling down to a rural, in the grand scheme of things, this is hick country. Okay? Not a lot of wealth here. Not a lot of prestige. We are hundreds of years removed from this independent nation where the king killed a giant with a slingshot. Okay? They've kind of become a laughing stock on the world stage comparatively. And now there's reason for people all over to come. And the right side of your map, that says Caesarea Philippi, that's when we're getting into. So if you hear pagan, if you hear Gentile, these are just words for non-Jew, which we would all be thrust into, okay? This is not a Christian world. And this is tough for us to get on that level because that's all we know is our modern Christian world. So let's explore this a little bit more. Now that we have some geography, a better understanding of who all is in that crowd, because, boy, it's a big mix of out-of-towners and hometown folks. And we've seen and we've heard just down there at the bottom of the screen what the hometown crowd thought of Jesus. So that's all mixed up in there. Now we've got some fishermen, not highest on the social economic totem pole, right? They've left behind the biggest catch of their life in order to follow this traveling preacher. And so this gathering of followers and listeners and sick folks and what we presume to be, demonically influenced or possessed individuals, they come all around this level place to do what? Worship. To listen, to see what's going on with their own eyes. They've heard about it. I want to see it. Wouldn't you be so impressed to see somebody healed of a debilitating illness from some no-name carpenter in a part of the world that you wouldn't choose to visit otherwise? Wouldn't that be amazing if you could listen to the words that you've only heard about, but they were so impactful when you heard them? What, second, third, fourth? How many hands down did you hear this story and that caused you to uproot yourself from where you are to go and hear this? But then there were those who wanted to physically touch Jesus. Well, don't you have motives for what you do, where you go, who you place yourself next to. There's all sorts of reasons. And we wouldn't say there's any selfish reasons that we have, because a lot of them are good, honest reasons to be close to somebody. But at the same time, in this giving and receiving, don't you imagine there's a portion of this crowd is, whoa, what might happen to me if I draw near to this individual? There's all kinds of other people that they just want to touch him. What if I touch him too? Well, I can walk and talk, but I have problems that nobody knows about. They don't put a cast on a bad back. There's no sign you wear when you have severe depression. There's no placard you carry around that lets everybody know every buffet you pass is a big trap for you. There's no method of letting the cashier know that all the liquor and all the cigarettes behind them are a big snare for you, right? So you can imagine the many problems that might be in this crowd, the many issues that brought you to travel to where Jesus is, and everybody has come to be healed by him, and that includes the pagans. That includes the non-Jews. And if you've ever been to a sporting event where the visiting section has a bigger crowd than the home team, this is where it is. You understand? The home crowd wants this dude dead already. And that's why they might be in the crowd, because their anger is already being fueled. It says people from Jerusalem came. You know who lives in Jerusalem? Well, if you're a Jew living in this part of the world, it's the people that dominate your world. The oppressors. We talked about them a few weeks ago. You got to imagine they're in the crowd. Do you think they bumped elbows with somebody they'd like not to worship with? Or somebody that they thought they were better than? Or are there degrees of poverty all represented in this crowd? It's a scandalous text here. Look, we've got people from all over, everyone trying to touch, everyone trying to be healed. And we got to understand that this is a universal scope to God's love. One of the things Christianity is slighted on regularly is that you have to believe in this one true God, and we call him Jesus. But the exclusivity is in the inclusivity. At this open invitation exists for all people. And so look at this. The text is going to tell us people from all over. I'm supporting my claim here of Jesus's inclusivity. Everyone tried to touch him. He healed everyone. Well, it doesn't get more inclusive than that, does it? It's the universal scope of God's power that those gathered there that day, it says, nobody went away disappointed. It would take faith to believe everybody in a crowd went away blessed, would it not? Let's continue with this story. We're going to break off a little bit here at a time, okay? Verse 20. Then Jesus turned to his disciples and said, God blesses you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. If you've heard the Beatitudes, if you've seen them written down somewhere, these are going to go in line with what Matthew has portrayed. And we're going to take them blessing by blessing and talk about them a little bit more. The poor are those who have a desperate need, an inability to help themselves. And because of this, the poverty has driven them to turn to God for their hope. I don't know why these conditions exist. It does make me question the belief in an all-loving God, because you want your all-loving God to not create a condition where there could be intense hardship. I'm not saying that God does that, but that is one of the things we wrestle with quite often, just within our own human spirit and our collective human experience. We do struggle with this understanding, and we want to say, well, our faith assures us that when we are poor, we are blessed. Just like our faith assures us that in this crowd, that some 2,000 years in the past, yes, in fact, when the Bible says everyone was healed, we have faith that yes, everyone was healed. And when we say things like that, an unbelieving world is going to say, prove it. So Jesus is giving these teachings primarily to his disciples. Now, if you've gone on some sort of excursion, maybe it was a vacation, maybe it was a hunting trip, maybe it was a girlfriend getaway for the weekend, maybe it was a time when you played sports and you had the camaraderie of a team, maybe it was after that really tough day at the office or out in the fields or with the crew on the job site, and you didn't think you were going to complete the task, but you all worked together to get it done. So that sense of teamsmanship, can you imagine when you come down off of the mountain with Jesus, the sort of camaraderie that you have brewing within you? You have these experiences that you've shared with certain people that you really connect with, that you'll take with you to the grave, they say. And now there's a crowd on this level plane that wasn't a part of all that experience, but they're around witnessing Jesus trying to focus on this core group. You've seen this happen before, have you not? I mean, later today, we will watch the Super Bowl, and 60 to 70 to 80, I think it seats almost 100,000 there in LA. When they watch these teams come out of the tunnel and do their pregame warm-ups, and many of them will huddle together and they will chant and they will act as one, and then 100,000 people, depending on what side you're on, they'll get into it too. And then millions around the world, oh yeah, they'll be invested at home. So maybe on a smaller scale in this part of the world that we looked at on a map, knowing what we know about what's going on today, we can see this crowd all around you. Shh, quiet. He's saying something over there. And then he's not talking to us. Yeah, but there's good stuff here. Be quiet, kids. Listen. Look, we marched all this way with your granny that can't take a step. Tell her to be quiet so we can hear. Still trying to get her healed. Okay, how about this? If you're in class and everybody's getting a snack and you're one of the first to get snack, do you have a different viewpoint of somebody that hasn't got their snack yet and their last name starts with Z? You have a different perspective in the crowd, right? Hey, granny's healed. Let's get her home. I can make it into work today. Yeah. What Jesus is talking, we got the healing, let's get. Then there's the person where they're still unhealed while Jesus is talking. So I hope he is quiet so I can get up there and touch him. Should I go touch him now? He's trying to talk to people. Just go touch him. It's like trying to approach Santa Claus when he's already got a kid on his knee, And then you got folks in there, they're like, well, it'd be too forward of me to just walk up there and ask. Everywhere I go, for the last 15 years, I have to shout at people, unclean, because I've got these festering sores all out of me. My family won't have nothing to do with me, and I have to live on the outskirts of town. You think they're just going to let me march up there in this mob and touch this guy? I'm going to send everybody running. Maybe after the service. Maybe when most people are gone. Maybe when nobody sees me. Maybe I'll approach him then. Am I going to listen to anything he has to say? Or am I going to wait for the service to conclude so I can get what I really want to get? You got to imagine all this personality in that crowd. That's one of the things that Luke is not going to speculate on. But you and I can. We've got a couple millennia of speculation on what really happened on this level plane in a part of the world that many of us have never set foot on and never will. These are people who have nothing but depend on God for everything. And again, we're talking about ethnic status, social, economic conditions, and we're not talking so much about spiritual conditions or attitudes. This is how we lessen the gospel, because Matthew is going to include a phrase, in spirit, poor in spirit. And we use that to broad brush a lot of things instead of what Luke is saying, what it's really all about. What you just do not have and cannot ever possess because you are extremely, extremely poor. So, building on that, let's look at one word, the word is. I'm going to wager that that word is the most important word in our text today. And it is so insignificant because it's just the word is. Jesus says the kingdom of God is yours. So when you receive blessings because of what only appears to be a curse, that you experience hope and joy that is completely independent of your outward appearance or your inward current circumstances. And the is so powerfully accepting that right now, no matter who you are, where you've been, where you're going, the kingdom is yours if you choose to believe in Jesus Christ. This kingdom of heaven is not a distant place. Jesus is saying because it is in you currently now. Now, he's supposed to have said that 2,000 years ago. Why are we still wondering if it's true or not? Let's continue. 21st verse. God blesses you who are hungry now, for you will be satisfied. God blesses you who weep now, for in due time you will laugh. Soon after this service, a young person will come to me, and they will say, Dad, I'm starving. They'll say it. They will say it. And I know they're not starving. But I know what it is to be hungry. You know what it is to be hungry too, right? Man, I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten since breakfast. You know? How long have you gone without eating? Just answer that question in your mind. There are those that maybe fast as a spiritual discipline. How long have you gone? There are those of us who have had to fast because of a medical procedure. Is that painful? There are those of us who maybe know poverty on this level. You truly are hungry because there is absolutely nothing to eat. That hunger is based on poverty and a person's lot in this life, and yet they take a stand to follow Christ. Let's remember last week, the nets were very empty. The nets were very, very empty. The fishing crew was defeated. Yes, they had a huge catch, maybe the biggest of their lives, but it didn't come without first heeding the call to go out and fish again. Now, when you come home making less than what you were told you would earn, how apt are you to go out and give it 110% the next day? Or when the amount you earn, somebody else takes the lion's share of what you invested and what you sacrificed in order to achieve, what's your attitude like the next day when it's time to clock in? And you could see in all of this why poverty would take a person away from faith and away from belief, because what are you doing now? My cupboards are bare, my pockets are empty, and you're telling me I should rejoice? I should leap for joy? But the promise here that Christ is offering is that the journey will involve you being released from everything that you find so shameful now. But again, that is a matter of faith. And Jesus explained to this core group with a lot of ears and eyes listening. And remember, within this core group, there's various places where people fall on that social ladder and their economic status and their reputation, both good and bad. All within this core group that Jesus has just come down from the mountaintop with. He's telling you, this life is not going to involve the type of fame that you might see represented when you look out into the world. And it's not going to make you the cool kid at school or at work. And it's not going to bring about the type of wealth that all of us envision, like we're Scrooge McDuck jumping and diving into that gold coin room. It means sorrow. It means weeping and suffering. But those who weep, those who suffer, and those who know sorrow would also always know the God of comfort. You know who impresses me as people that walk that path? People that have lost their spouse. If you listen to the radio this morning, the show I hosted, I talked about my granny a number of times. What impresses me about her faith is what her faith has been like in the last 27 years. You know, the day she lost her husband to today, and still never lacking in faith, yet lacking in so many other things. A life partner and companion. There's income attached to this person that you love and now miss. There's relationship. There's a breakdown of family. You know, the gatherings aren't the same anymore. There's an empty spot around the table. There's a voice we used to love to hear, and now we don't hear it anymore. And, you know, we look to fill that void or cultivate that relationship further. And the people that are able to do it, I find in this life, are those that have been beaten on the most, those that have lost the most. And those are the folks that I can't ever seem to convince that God doesn't have a plan for them. They won't hear it. It's not a message that will be received at all because faith trumps what reality is presenting. I wish they didn't have to lose so much so they could impact my faith so well. I wish you didn't have to walk through these doors having experienced so many losses, and yet those losses are maybe a connection to why you're here today. Because of the victory you've experienced in those losses, or the ones you hope to experience if I keep grinding this life out one more day, trying to be this disciple of Christ that this original audience is trying to be. 22 and 23, let's read those together. What blessings await you when people hate you? Come on, man. Come on. I'm in the crowd that day. You don't think I elbow the person next to me? This dude's crazy, man. Let's read it again. I can't help but read it and think, no, man. No. All right. What blessings await you when people hate you? Go on and get some hate today. God loves you. What blessings await you when people hate you and exclude you and mock you and curse you as evil? You know what my kids don't like? Being left out. Okay, but they're blessed because you followed the Son of Man. Okay, so I'm cherry picking here. This isn't the girl didn't ask me to dance scenario. The hate, the exclusion, the mocking, the cursing is because of the Christ following. So just like we shouldn't make this about being poor in spirit when it's talking about poverty, we shouldn't make this about hate because I'm bald. Or hate because I chose to cover myself in tattoos, right? Or exclude me because I work at this type of profession. Or don't have anything to do with me because some of the craziness I told you about my family. We could all see ourselves in that picture, in that audience, all on this level plane, people from all over the world, and you've got this core group being told the kingdom is yours, but these blessings are awaiting them. Wait, what? The kingdom is mine, but I don't get the blessings now. I can live a heavenly life now without the blessings, you say. I say, wrong, sir. That's impossible. But yet I told people just this morning on the airwaves, when I start to believe that things are impossible, a God of the possible seems to show up every time and prove otherwise. That Jesus' teachings are so scandalous here because they will overturn every conventional expectation. What your cheekbones look like. Where your hairline resides. How good you look in the selfie. Thank God for filters. You get what I mean here, right? You know how many people I come into contact with every day who are dying. A doctor's told them, you're dying. Nurses have told him, you're dying. Specialists have told him, you're dying. How you doing today, sir? Pretty good. Pretty good. I mean, we want to project that we're a healthy member of the herd, because if we're not, well, who gets picked off first? And you got to be in this crowd. You've been in the waiting room before, haven't you? Wonder what she's got. He looks way worse than me. We do that, don't we? Look at what they wore to church today. Oh, I'm so glad he wore the tracksuit again. Yeah. Everything is pouring through these very human minds amidst all of this teaching, and it is scandalous. And the 24th verse says, what sorrow awaits you who are rich, for you have your only happiness now. Now, we would quote what? A famous rapper and say, mo money, mo problems. Yeah? Financial advisor would tell you that pay increase at work, your expenses are only going to grow to encompass that pay increase. And that so many more will live outside these means on borrowed credit, on interest rates that they will never be able to pay off. Go get that education, young person, and prove me different. Everybody in this crowd knows about money because the world in their time is operating on it. People are worshiping it. And if you don't have it, get it by any means possible. And if those that have it, you don't like them, go on and hate them. They're bad people. And if you don't have it, what'd you do? If you're poor, you must have done something. Must have done something wrong. And we wonder about all of these things. And then he says, if you're rich now, be careful. You're going to be sad later. And this is the tug of war we're always going to find ourselves in. Even in our churches, we want everybody to be welcome. Yet we need some folks who can help us fill the plate. Got to keep the lights on. Got to keep the doors open. This is the cost of doing business. Jesus, you're going to hold outdoor services endlessly? We might need a space with a roof. You don't think that's going to cost money? Interesting enough, Paul is going to tell us, and the Gospels are going to let us know, the financiers, those that held the pocketbook of Jesus' entourage, who were they? History will tell us that they were single, widowed women, by and large. And the one man who is named has a suspect reputation for skimming off the top and taking from other people. Now, if those type of characters just came off of the mountaintop with this scandalously born carpenter from an obscure part of the world, how much do you want to touch him? You must really need some healing. You'd be willing to believe in just about anything, wouldn't you? So much so that a couple millennia later, some tattooed guy in a tracksuit might tell you about him and you say, you know what? He's got something there. Crazy, you say, right? But all these places that are worshiping and open for in-person and virtual worship today, isn't that kind of what we're getting after, or what we should be getting after? Trying to wrap ourselves around this idea that when I feel only curses, those are really blessings. When I feel nothing but sadness, that is an opportunity to embrace God's happiness. When I don't have enough to pay the bills, I should leap for joy and thank God. What sorrows await, verse 25. For you who are fat and prosperous now, for a time of awful hunger awaits you.